Hey folks, Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and today I'm doing yet another installment of the Freelancer Q&A series that I do. I apologize for missing out last week. I had a case of laryngitis. I was kind of sick last week. I'm still getting over it, so if my voice is a little scratchy, my apologies. I guess my voice is always kind of a little scratchy, but such is life. Today's question is it okay to fake it till you make it? And if so, how much? Now, again, to set the stage, as I usually do, we're talking here in the context of a freelancing business. And if memory serves, the context of this question in particular is when you're first hanging out your shingle as a business owner or freelancer, probably specifically. But basically, so you go off on your own, you assemble a website or whatever, and can you fake it till you make it in order to like win business or whatever? Or actually, maybe I should kind of set the stage here a little more broadly by saying maybe that's the intent, um, because really, so this phrase "fake it till you make it," where I think the origin comes from is the idea that you will eventually achieve or get to success by imitating the behaviors of successful people. So I think what people originally at least meant by this is, can if your goal is to be an award-winning, world-renowned, history-renowned CEO, then maybe you look at Steve Jobs and, oh, this is appropriate. Well, it's not a turtleneck, but like you look at Steve Jobs and you say, I'm going to wear like a plain colored shirt. What did he wear? Black turtlenecks. Like, I'm going to wear a black turtleneck. I'm going to get up early. I'm going to do holistic medicine, whatever stuff Steve Jobs did. So I'm going to fake being Steve Jobs. I'm going to imitate all of his habits. And by imitating that person's behavior, I am going to eventually, develop this muscle memory of being successful like that person. Now, I have my own opinion on imitating road tactics. That isn't the most favorable one, but in that case, I think it can mean a different thing than maybe what's meant here, which is, there's an element of like fake it till you make it, that I've talked about before. I'll put a link up on YouTube. In like, should you use we on your website when it's you all by yourself? This is a different flavor of what I'll call fake it till you make it. So if you put up a new website and you say, we here at Acme Inc. Consulting believe in integrity, you are faking being a larger agency. You're trying to sound like there's multiple of you when there aren't. Uh, Now, this particular flavor of fake it till you make it is pretty well trod, in common industry practice. Like, you are constantly doing this sort of low key hyperbole, exaggerate as much as you can get away with it, on resumes. That's the whole nature of resumes and hiring. The hiring authority kind of lies about how awesome they are, and the candidate lies about how awesome they are, except you try to do it in a way where you can't technically be accused of lying. So there is this element of puffery, of making yourself seem bigger and more impressive than you really are, that we might loosely call a better foot forward. So those are the two flavors I understand of, fake it till you make it. Now, in terms of business, my personal take on this is both of these paths, in different ways, lead to different things that aren't great. So I wouldn't really advocate this course at all. Personally, I'm not a believer in this kind of thing. But the more nuanced take I have on this is, maybe for a bit, there are gray areas. Certainly people do this to some success. You stand up the Royal We website and you get business, and then eventually you hire and become an actual we, and hey, you made it. So like, people do this, people pull it off. I don't really like the approach. And maybe to speak to this further, let me break down why I think people might do this, because there's a few different reasons, and then kind of address those individually. So the first problem I could see somebody solving with this is the feeling of imposter syndrome. So how do you get past imposter syndrome? And for those of you who may not know, imposter syndrome is this idea that you will be, you will always, even when you're doing something adequately, you will feel like you're not good enough. There are things I don't know. I can't possibly be good enough at this. I'm an imposter. Like, yeah, if you're a programmer, maybe I've been programming for 3 years, but I've got a website up. There's all these experts that know way more than me and have been programming for way longer. Like, whoa, why does anybody work with me at all? that feeling of underconfidence, I'll call it, as opposed to overconfidence, that you're selling yourself short. So it's a good thing to overcome that, and maybe a fake it till you make it approach, whether it's the simulating successful people or whether it's exaggerating your experience. Maybe you can use it as kind of a balm for imposter syndrome. That might be one reason. A second reason might be purely the imitation approach, which is that you're like learning by imitation. So if I'm going to try to be a successful freelancer, I'm going to go and analyze what a bunch of other freelancers are doing. I will mimic them, and then things will happen and I will become successful. It might be a secondary motivation. And then the third one might be that you're struggling. People won't hire you, and you surmise that it's because you're not experienced or impressive enough, so you fake it. And this is the one I would really, really stay away from. The first two are more understandable. So, if let me speak to imposter syndrome first. If you have imposter syndrome, I guess fake it till you make it could apply, but like, what are you faking really? I wouldn't suggest overcoming imposter syndrome by exaggerating your experience, because if that's the case, you're just going to feel even more out over your skis. If you feel like what you are actually is not good enough compared to where you need to be, then you're already in this kind of deficit of, I don't feel confident enough to like expand where you're like pretending to be. This is not the route I would go. I think if you are really struggling with imposter syndrome, there are much better ways to overcome this. One would be, in particular, that maybe you seek out a peer cohort. So you join a community of freelancers, or you find and get into some kind of mastermind. And if you get into a more private venue where people can be realistic about their struggles and their insecurities and stuff, then you will probably be soothed by hearing that other people, maybe people you even view of as ahead of their journey compared to you, struggle with the same kind of insecurities and whatnot. And you might also learn methods for coping with those insecurities, how people deal with it, etc. So I think getting into the right groups and the right cohorts and reaching out and having, productive interactions with people is a much better approach here than trying to fake anything. Because in a manner of speaking, it's kind of the whole like Instagram dynamic where the veneer that you're seeing there of everybody is this way more impressive version than they're trying to put forward. You don't hear a lot of podcasts from freelancers about like, here's how I went off on my own freelancing for 4 months and face planted and went and took a job again. Those stories don't tend to survive. Instead, there's this survivorship selection bias where people are always putting their best foot forward, talking about success. And so there can be this tendency to assume that everybody who tries something is way more successful than you. So the real solve for that is to go out and find instances where that isn't true, where you're getting a more realistic or even pessimistic look at the world. So if you are struggling with imposter syndrome, I do not advocate faking anything. I advocate going and finding a community that you can sort of relate to and learn from and exchange stories with and maybe even vent to or what have you. So if you're, the second one I believe I was saying is if you're kind of trying to mimic and gain some practice. So you're trying to simulate being a more experienced freelancer by mimicking these freelancers, faking being a successful freelancer in faking or acting as if you were these people. I'm kind of rambling, I'm sorry, but it's hard for me to wrap my head around this because I've never been one to really learn by mimicry. I'd say here be dragons. So like, let's say for instance, that you go out and you identify that, Jane Smith is a successful freelancer and you want to mimic her behaviors to become a successful freelancer. If the behaviors you are mimicking of hers are that she writes good proposals, that she has a good bedside manner with prospects, that she's diligent about follow-up, that she does good, honest business, etc. If you choose to mimic things like that, that actually contribute to her success, and you practice those things and get better at them, then yes, probably you will become better yourself. But this isn't really because of mimicry. It's more because you're stripping Jane's practice down to parts and you're identifying what's relevant and what isn't. So on the flip side of this, imagine if Jane wakes up every day at 10 a.m. and goes to bed at 4 a.m. because Jane's a night owl who doesn't sleep a lot. And Jane also eats 2 eggs for breakfast every day, and Jane has exactly 3 cats. If you go out, adopt 3 cats, start eating 2 eggs for breakfast every day and waking up at 10, I don't know that that's going to help you be a successful freelancer. So it really isn't about Jane or any of the behaviors per se. It's about identifying the criterion for success. And I think that mimicry tends to be a relatively inefficient way to do that compared to actually like deconstructing and analyzing success criteria. So could this lead to success? Sure. But it could also lead to some other things. One is you mimic the wrong things, and then you're just doing cargo cult nonsense like getting up late and eating eggs and adopting cats. Another thing is if you try to mimic the behavior of multiple freelancers, maybe you find a second one like Joe Miller, and Joe Miller gets up every day at 5 a.m., doesn't eat any breakfast, and doesn't have any pets. Well, what are you going to do? Now you can't synthesize those two sets of how do you simultaneously have 3 cats and no pets? So you can start to get scrambled and have an incoherent and cognitive dissonance subject worldview by trying to mimic multiple people. Another thing that you will do is you run a very real risk of looking buffoonish. If you imitate people's behavior without understanding why they're doing what they're doing, that's kind of classic advanced beginner stuff where you're mimicking a framework or adopting a framework, mimicking without really understanding context. And that leads to doing things you don't understand why you're doing. And that tends to lead to absurdity. So if somebody were to come along and say, you mentioned on your introductory email that you've been eating eggs and adopting cats. Why would I care about that? Your answer, unless you start babbling and making stuff up, would be, gosh, I don't know. It seemed like it would make me successful. Well, frankly, that's going to make you look like a clown on a discovery call with a client. So, I wouldn't do this. I would not get into the habit of mimicking people that are successful in the hopes that it will make you successful. I would instead write down all of those behaviors that you observe and then kind of take that away from the person, and maybe if you're going to do an exercise like this on a spreadsheet, right next to the behavior, how likely it is that you think this behavior correlates with freelancing success, and then maybe sort those and then go looking for those same behaviors again and again in other successful freelancers. Now, once you've identified things that 3, 4, 5 of them share in common that they all seem to do, well, hey, you're probably onto something, and you don't need to mimic anything. If they all are diligent about following up with prospects, if they all conduct, discovery calls that go a certain way, if they all do follow up following an engagement, then you don't need to mimic that. You just need to look at that and sort of construct your own version of that and what it's going to look like. So in this sense, I wouldn't do the fake it till you make it as a form of training, because I just think it's inefficient and subject to problems. Now, the last form, which is to win business, this one in absolute categorical terms, I would not recommend doing. I think this is, at best, an unethical thing that most people do that you've learned from, college applications and applying for jobs, which is put your best foot forward and do it where you're getting right into that gray area and up to the very edge of what could be considered lying, but isn't technically lying. The royal we on the website, extrapolating one single experience that you had with a client to make it sort of seem like it was 5 different clients, but then if pressed, you can be like, oh, I can see where you misunderstood that. I technically never said that. Like, I don't like that. To me, what you are doing there is you are lying either by omission or by implication or just explicitly lying about your experience. And to me, you are then building your book of business on an entirely bad faith act. So you are giving the client a false impression of your experience, and you are giving them a false impression of what they'll be getting for their money by dealing with you. And then you are trying to build a good relationship on that fundamentally rotten foundation. So even if this works, there is a certain undercurrent of ickiness to it. Maybe you put up the royal we on your website, and as I said earlier in the video, you do a few engagements and you start getting more business. Then you go hire a VA for 2 hours a week, and you're like, hey, I made it. Technically, it is a we now, so I'm not lying anymore. Great, I guess you can make it that way. I still don't like that. Now, just as a disclaimer here, I should mention, I don't exactly consider putting a we on your website to be the worst thing in the world. It is a small form of dishonesty, but I think it's a pretty benign one as far as these things go. Like I said, you have learned this certainly if you've ever been in the job world. The applying for and interviewing and that whole process is just all sort of a house of lie cards that we build. So there is precedent. People do it. I'm not saying it makes you a bad person, but understand that if you put up a website that talks about we and it's just you, that is kind of a lie. So anyway, I'm just picking on that example, but there's a lot of things that you could do, sort of exaggerating or misplacing your testimonials, or taking something your mom said and pretending she's not your mom, that type of thing. It all sort of adds up to the same thing. And the best case in that style of fake it till you make it is that you set up what you want to be true about your business, and then you win business, and eventually you get enough business that you feel confident reverting to what's true in how you represent your business. But I'll tell you what, if you learn to win business by lying, you know what you're probably going to do as your business grows, as you need more and more revenue, you know, while your expenses grow, as things scale up. I don't think you're going to suddenly have this moment where you're like, all right, well, that's a relief. I've gotten this far by lying and I'm going to stop. You will probably continue to do that sort of lying and exaggerating and those practices to win business, even if right now you tell yourself you won't. Um, so, and that's all the best case. The worst case is, again, to get back, like, you put up the website and you could look kind of buffoonish, you know, so we do this, we do that. They get on a sales call with you. So who's the we? Oh, it's just me. Okay. This, you know, you're not making the best impression here. Or you tell another lie to, like, you know, try to keep it up. Oh, well, you know, for the moment it's just me, but I had this other person that totally worked for me once. And, you know, you can really get down a rabbit hole with trying to keep all of these things straight. So that, you know, looking bad is a risk. It's also a risk that you know, say you pretend instead of a freelancer to be an agency, you win business that way. And then the client never really sees that you've exaggerated per se, but because you are pretending to be more than you are, or pretending to have more experience than you do, or whatever, you get out over your skis and you do a bad job. Now, after the fact, when you're starting to exchange nasty emails and who should write off what, then the client maybe discovers, oh, you're not all you made yourself out to be. Ooh, now the best case scenario is really, really bad word of mouth. The worst case scenario might be like borderline legal claims, depending on how you misrepresented yourself. So just wow, I cannot stress enough that I just don't see good things coming out of this sort of bad faith way of engaging and pretending to be more and better than you are. So if you're not winning business, I don't think lying is your path to joy. There's probably a lot of things that you could do, you know, some tactics that come to mind off the top of my head. I mean, like, you could always, I guess, lower your prices, but more to the point, because that doesn't always even work. You can be too cheap and then people will just say, like, well, you don't know what you're doing. So one thing that I really like, and, you know, Hit Subscribe is doing this as we roll out offerings to this day. When you're new at something, roll out a discounted price, or maybe even do it for free for the first rep or two, but explain what you're doing. Hey, I'm new to this, but if you take a chance on me, I'll give you a discount. That discount's going to sunset in 6 months. I intend to have done 2 or 3 of these, at which time I'm going to raise my retail rates to X, because I think by then I can justify it. So do you want to come in for an early bird, kind of like alpha or beta discount? That can be a great way to reduce your price without like long-term problems and win business in the shorter term. If you're having trouble landing business, another thing might be like adjusting your target market. So especially if you're suffering from lack of confidence, like, well, I'm going to go, you know, sell consultative engagements to CEOs, and you have no experience that justifies that. Well, maybe sell consultative to someone lower in the org chart, or sell things into a market, like if you're an application developer, sell things, something into a market of people who are not in that area of expertise. You know, you go to the pizza stores and the barber shops in town and say, you know, I'll do an audit of your website or something. So find somebody where they do respect and value your expertise, or at least they lack it themselves. So adjusting who you're selling to, who you're talking to, who you're trying to impress can help. In general, adjust your pitch and your value proposition. So if you're struggling with sales, you know, something's wrong there. So you might, you know, again, like, reduce your prices. You might reduce the scope of what you're offering. You might reduce or adjust how you're selling yourself, what the value is that you're offering, etc. If you're failing to win business, like maybe you're getting enough calls and interest, people are reaching out to you. It could be that something is wrong with your sales. Like maybe your manner in your sales call is really bad. Record yourself doing a couple sales calls, have someone watch it, give you notes. Maybe you're just failing to close the deal because you get really weird during the sales call, and then you could adjust that rather than lying to people or whatever. um, there's a lot with your positioning, et cetera, that you could adjust. In general, adjust something. If nobody is finding out about you, then reach out to your friends and family network, get the word out or something like that. Whatever it is, somewhere in the pipeline of business between awareness all the way down to sales, something is going wrong. And you have ways to adjust that something that don't involve lying. So, yeah, that's kind of my all in take on that subject. Whatever problem you are trying to solve by blindly mimicking someone or exaggerating your experience or both, whatever problem you are trying to solve by doing those things, there are better ways to solve that problem. And I would certainly enlist them. So the best case scenario, if you're engaging in fake it till you make it, is like, hey, you're in a gray area. You might look like a clown. It might kind of sort of work for a while. And that's not really a great best case. So I would pull back from that impulse and try to zoom in on what exactly is wrong, or what exactly you want to fix, or what exactly you want to learn to do that you think will add value, and formulate a better and more focused plan to do whatever that is. So hopefully that makes sense, and I will catch you all next time.